let's have a look at the other parties. So I did a very quick dive into the Scottish National Party and to Plaid Cymru and to the Greens. And without going into too much detail, you won't be surprised to hear that both the SNP and Plaid are actually quite light on domestic policies, which are, would be specifically pertaining to the workplace. And a lot of this is because they are these aren't domestic elections for the devolved parliaments. But there are one or two things that did jump out with the SNP. The first thing is that they want to devolve NI. They want to remove responsibility for NI to Scotland, and they want to be able to set their own rates. So, not surprising there, really. They've been asking for it for a long time. Second point is that they want to bring in a £12 billion wealth tax, but they haven't identified where, what wealth is, who's going to be paying it, where the various cutoffs are. But given Scotland's a fairly small country with a very limited number of billionaires, I'm not sure if they just want J.K. Rowling to pay it all, but the reality is that I wouldn't be at all surprised if that actually involves people who are, earning middle class incomes.
I mean, can I just comment on that? I mean, to make that such grandstanding comment, which is so significant and impactful, but completely lacking in any substance of detail.
Yeah.
Well,
I think for our English viewers, and although I live in England, I am Scottish, and I still have a lot of family in Scotland. I only live about 20 miles away from Scotland. Just to explain, there's a civil war going on in Scotland on the nationalist side between the SNP, which is these days is John Swinney, and the sort of socialist SNP, and the conservative, small c conservative SNP, which is Alex Salmond, which is now called the Alba Party. And this war's been going on for 50 years, 60 years. It's not new. It's been going on for a very long time. And it's a really bitter civil war. It's every bit as bitter as the Remainer, Brexit, Tories, or the Corbyn, Blairites, Labour. It's just as bitter. And what we have here is we have a manifesto that's very much the socialist SNP trying to regain the vote that they've lost in central Scotland, or they're about to lose in central Scotland.
Yeah.
But they're about to see that flip to the Labour Party. Now, this does have a knock-on effect in England and Wales, because until fairly recently, the Labour Party was able to count on a huge block vote in central Scotland that would typically tip the balance in favour of the Labour Party in UK national elections. Now, they lost that in 2014 when Salmond took the SNP to the left and was able to capture that Labour vote. He lost his Conservative vote, but he just captured the Labour vote. And that created a big problem for Scotland. Careers were ended overnight with a whole load of, big hitting Scottish Labourites. It's only been now that they've started to recover. But again, the SNP are attacking Starmer on Starmer being a flip-flopping Blairite and them being the true socialist party, which is why we're seeing some quite socialist policies. And another one is that the effective tax rate for somebody who'll be earning £150,000 a year in Scotland is basically about 5 to 6% higher than somebody earning the equivalent in England or Wales. And that sort of dovetails as you come down towards sort of 50,000-ish, that you're still paying more. They are wanting to exit Brexit. They're calling exit Brexit. This is despite a third of SNP voters voting for Brexit. So they've always tried to they've always been a bit on the fence with this. Sturgeon was very anti-Brexit, but actually, the more moderate SNP people understood that they had a lot of people in the SNP who didn't like the fact they'd be swapping London for Brussels. I didn't see the point, which is completely real, utterly logical. they are going completely the opposite direction on immigration from the other parties, with the exception of the Greens. So all the other parties have said they're going to get a handle on immigration, whether or not we believe them as a completely different kettle of fish. But the SNP are saying, well, actually, they want to have local powers to issue work permits. They want to have more devolved power around work permit issue. They want to introduce post-study visas for students and extend family visas for students. And they want to extend the welcome for asylum seekers, which they don't go into detail as to what asylum seekers actually are. Now, this is because in Scotland there's a depopulation issue, and the population of Scotland has been dropping for years. Now, what the SNP don't realise here, they don't seem to have made the link between putting tax rates up and destroying opportunities and for business and entrepreneurial growth in Scotland, and people leaving Scotland for England and other countries. They haven't seemed to have made that link. So people who are growing up in Scotland now are they've got a brain drain now. They've got a big problem. But people, particularly as the free university place policy backfires, and it backfires horribly on Scottish students. You've got a real problem when you've got you're having to turn down Scottish students because you can't afford to issue enough free places. So politically, people who hear this think, oh, that sounds wonderful. And the Greens are wanting to do it in England. But what they don't understand is because you make more money from selling a university place to an overseas student or an English or Welsh university student, you restrict the number of free places you've got for Scottish students. As a result, Edinburgh would maybe take, 20 medical students. I can't remember off the top of my head how many they take, but only like 4% of those places are actually going to Scottish students. So if you're coming from a deprived background in Scotland and you're really bright, you're not getting any benefit from this, because you haven't got the option of paying for your fees, because that would be politically toxic for the SNP. So instead, you just don't get the opportunity.
Yeah,
so the only thing you've got is that goes to go to England. Because of the way the fee system works, that's discouraged as well. So they've actually, in having this sort of free education, free university education, they've actually condemned a whole load of poorer Scottish students to shut off any opportunity they have for further education. And that's a really good example of the unintended consequences, which politicians just don't seem to think through these days. So goodness me, we see those in spades. So moving quickly on, I mention this around the visas because it's important, because the access to talent is really important for our for businesses who are operating in Scotland, who are trying to set up shop in Scotland. They want to scrap electricity and gas standing charges. They haven't said if this is both to include commercial properties. In Scotland, commercial businesses pay water. They have to pay water companies for their water. Domestic water is still part of council tax up there, unlike it in England and Wales. And those water rates are actually quite expensive. So I don't know what they haven't said anything about that. Now, the other thing they've said is that they are going to continue to stop oil and gas production and expo in the North Sea and off the Shetland Islands. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but one of the largest gas deposits in the Northern Hemisphere was found in between the Orkneys and Shetland Islands. And there's enough gas there to keep Britain, burning for the next 400 years or something. And because of net zero reasons, they're not exploiting it. Oil and gas production has dropped from 250 million barrels a year in 2001 to 75 million barrels a year this year. And it has decimated the northeast of Scotland. Yeah. It's destroyed the northeast of Scotland. The northeast of Scotland used to be one of the wealthiest parts of the UK. Aberdeen was a glorious city. Amazing place. I don't know if you ever went up there, Steve. It was a really nice place to go. Culture, shops, restaurants, theatre, there was just a buzz about the place. You had people from all over the world landing there. It was it was a really interesting place, and that had an impact across the whole of the county up there, from Inverness all the way down to Fife. The oil and gas sector sucked in and distributed so much cash in the area. We were up there last year, and it's heartbreaking. I had not been to Aberdeen for 15 years, and it was absolutely heartbreaking to see what's happened to that city. It really is. My son's looking at going to universities at the moment. Aberdeen was on his list. It's not anymore. It's really sad. And this is a self-inflicted own goal by the SNP and the British government. And so the SNP have got a problem, though, as have the Labour Party, because up there they are furious. And this impacts all the sort of businesses that we work with up there as well. All in the same boat. So meanwhile, however, the SNP have announced that they're going to be rolling out heat pumps and turbo building windmills or something, because apparently windmills, there's lots of wind in Scotland, so they should be building lots of windmills. You won't be surprised to hear that Plaid Cymru are the same. They're even more swivel-eyed on the environment stuff. They want to bring net zero by 2035. I mean, I just don't know what to say to that.
No.
I mean, even the Greens say that 2040 is punchy, and that's in their manifesto. But Plaid Cymru 2035. I mean, I
speechless.
Welsh people, what are you doing? Come on, this is arithmetic. This is really, really basic stuff. You've got to vote for politicians who can count. You got to vote for politicians who actually work using current technologies rather than stuff that's in the future. You might as well vote for somebody who's saying they're going to invent the Star Trek transporter and solve world hunger. That's literally how the fantasy here. They also want to join the single market. And the other big one that they're pushing forward is fair funding for Wales, where they want to apply the same Barnett formula that's used in Scotland onto Wales. There's nothing else in there. There's no other than a sort of, blah, 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 word salads, green economy. There's nothing in there for small businesses or for any sort of commercial, as you'd probably expect from what's a hard left party. The Greens, back to a national party. Well, yeah, what really impacts people? Well, first of all, they want to put taxes up for those people who are on just over 50 grand a year. And the Greens say this will only cost £17 each a week or something, but you multiply that out and it's actually quite a lot of money. They want to hit net zero by 2040. And as you can imagine, the various policies are all angled towards that. One thing that did jump out, which might impact small businesses, is to remove VAT from what they call cultural activities. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of small businesses. It might include things like, bookshops or restaurants or bars. It might include, that sector. I should imagine it'll be in the Green Party. It'll probably be, avant-garde theatre and interpretive dance companies or something. Rather than anything that the oi polloi might enjoy, but that could be quite a big move if they do change that. The other thing that they're talking about bringing in is housing reform in the form of rent controls, which again could hit some small businesses. Rent controls are universally a disaster when they're brought in. They have precisely the opposite effect. The other thing they want to do is to abolish the Section 21 no-fault evictions, which actually the Tories have been pledging to do for the last 10 years and still haven't done anything about, and actually which are a major problem in our country because they create they create a situation where tenancies are all short term, and you've got families who are living in short term tenancies without any security of tenure, without any long term tenancy agreements, and this makes people very insecure. This affects the birth rate of the country. So something does need to be done about that. At least they're looking to address that. But rent controls, it's been a disaster in Scotland. It was a disaster when they did it in New York. It's why are they doing it?
Yes, yeah.
But again, as Steve said, you've got a little bit of fantasy politics going on here. Not so much from SNP and Plaid Cymru, because they do, they do get into power. They're much closer to the reins of power than the Greens are. But nonetheless, if we end up with a close vote, then you could end up with the Greens in coalition with Labour.
Yeah.
It's quite possible, particularly as a lot of those Corbynites have gone to the Green Party. They've now found their home over there. So we've got on for an hour, but what we're going to do is we'll split this into two podcasts. We'll cut the bit that Steve did about reform from the other one, so we've got two sort of half-hour ones as opposed to 1 hour one. But have you got anything to add to all that lot, Steve?
Well, I was while you were talking, I was just having a quick glance at the Workers' Party of Britain.
Oh, gorgeous George!
Now, that's. It's very detailed and actually does cover some of the things that you've just been critical of the some of the devolved parties' manifestos. It is very detailed, and frankly, that there is some logical stuff in there. In terms of lots of the subjects that I won't go into any detail, but a lot of the subjects we've been talking about, and I would say actually some of it is quite common sense. Yeah. And there are aspects of it that may not be hugely dissimilar to some aspects of reforms.
Well, absolutely. I would say that I would actually say, and George Galloway would also admit this, that he's closer to Nigel Farage on a lot of things than say Rishi Sunak or Rishi Sunak or Labour or Blairite Labour.
So, the enemy. It certainly talks a lot about industrial strategy. It also asks for I think I saw a referendum on net zero.
Yep.
So it doesn't just swallow all of the net zero subject.
He's a bit of a paradox, George Galloway, in so many ways, because I don't know if you ever saw that wonderful. The two speeches that really jump out, and I think he's most people would acknowledge that and it's something he shares with Nigel Farage, is the ability to do old-fashioned oratory. He can stand up in front of a crowd and win them over, his fantastic response to the U.S. Senate when he went over there and basically told them off, which is, if you haven't seen it, have a look at it on YouTube. It's worth watching. Even if you don't like George Galloway's politics, it's worth watching just as a sort of oratorical exercise. And the other one was a fantastic speech that he gave in favour of the Union during the Scottish referendum on independence, where he absolutely eviscerated the SNP. I think he and Nigel Farage were debating on the same side, and they went after the SNP and they absolutely eviscerated them. And it was very impressive. But then, of course, with George, you've also got all the other baggage as well, which, of course, isn't so attractive. The other party which we've not talked about is the SDP, who, of course, have a arrangement with Reform not to stand candidates up where Reform is standing candidates.
That's not strictly the case.
Is that not true? Is it?
No. We have in previous elections had that arrangement, but I know there are constituencies where there is a Reform candidate and there is an SDP candidate. Yeah. So the SDP the Reform are not formally standing down anyone in any constituency.
Okay. Yeah, we've got we don't have a Reform candidate up here, but we have got an SDP candidate. But I should imagine that most of the Conservatives' small C vote will go to the Conservatives, so from a local perspective, rather than rural constituencies like this have their own issues, and trying to keep Labour out will be the main focus. But the SDP have been an interesting party. This is the first manifesto they've released since the SDP really was since the days of David Owen and Shirley Williams, I think. And an interesting party. They've got I know Rod Liddle, the great Rod Liddle, is standing for them up and down the road from me in Teesside. His column's always a source of great mirth every week in the Guardian. I haven't looked at their manifesto in any detail, but I have on the whole, it's been more aligned with, giving the small guy a break along the lines of reform and, the Workers' Party, frankly, compared to the neolibs.
Yeah. Right. So interesting times. 2.5 weeks to general election day. I suspect turnout won't be particularly high. But I mean, just taking my own constituency, we got 12 candidates standing in my constituency, and there's nothing particularly unusual about my constituency. So I think that's probably not wholly uncommon. I think we've got a lot of independents standing, a lot of smaller parties standing. So people are certainly going to have their choice. But
this all points, going back to the point about the fragmentation of our politics. This all points to why we need to be thinking about a PR system.
Yeah.
We have such, the idea of these big, broad church parties isn't working any longer. And don't look at it from an electoral perspective. Look at it to see what's happened to the parties. The Conservative Party had an 80-seat majority. Now, even if Mr. Starmer does win a huge majority this time, which he may well do, Matthew Goodwin was writing in, I think it was the Spectator last month, saying how these big majorities don't mean anything anymore because people's politics turn on a dime on an issue, on a single issue. And whereas, in the days of Mrs. Thatcher or Tony Blair, an 80-seat majority would mean you're going to be in power 15 years. Who thought that the Conservatives would be looking at a wipeout 5 years after winning an 80-seat majority?
Well, and also I think a point to consider is that, yes, the Labour Party are probably going to end up in government, and they might end up in government with a very substantial majority. However, after the 4th of July, when we look at the actual number of votes that they've achieved, if I'm right in saying turnout's not going to be high, we know. You and I, again, Richard, are older enough to remember very clearly 1997 and the excitement in the air for a new Labour government, for Tony Blair's new Labour government. And we know today is very, very different feel to that moment.
Yeah.
I think the absolute numbers of people that might vote for Labour are not going to be significantly higher than they've been before. In fact, they could be lower in terms of absolute numbers of people that have put their cross in the Labour box. So even though the headcount of MPs might be high, it won't be representing a large number of actual bodies that have actively supported and put their X in the Labour box.
No, absolutely, and I think there's only so much longer the British people will put up with the situation where so many of them are not being represented in Parliament, be they Reform voters, Green voters, Liberal Democrat voters, British Workers' Party voters. That all these small parties are absolutely right. You have to now start to open up the seats of power to smaller parties. That's the way things have gone. That's the way things are in Europe. We are an aberration. The only other country in Europe that does it the way we do is Belarus. Everyone else is PR now, and PR does have problems. You've got to be careful how you set it up. But one of the big concerns about the Labour government is that Starmer's a lawyer. His front bench are lawyers. His instinct has always been to make Parliament subservient to law because he believes in the law more than he believes in democracy. I think that's pretty obvious. And, there are plans that the Labour Party has to put a bit of a wrecking ball through the Constitution and to turn us from being a democracy into being a critocracy. Critocracy means a government by lawyers. Whilst in America they have quite a large amount of critocracy in their constitution, their judiciary is elected, and ours isn't. It's appointed. So, I've got no particular objection to it if we can vote the judges in. But if we can't vote the judges in, then again, it's we know best. And I think one of the things that we're seeing here, Steve, is if you look at these parties, you've actually got the Conservatives and the Labour they're like this. And I mean, people have been using all sorts of expressions like, two cheeks of the same backside and that sort of thing, to describe them. And then you've got the other parties, and if you take the other parties and put them in a lump, you've actually got the sort of neoliberal status quo globalist agenda with Labour and Conservatives. And then you've got the small person, the individuals, the people, and, arguably democracy on the other side. And, it's a strange state of affairs where somebody who's coming from a, traditionally conservative with a small c background has more in common with George Galloway than they do with the ruling Conservative Party. It's extraordinary. Anyway, we'll knock it on the head for this. I will split this into two parts because it's been quite long. Before we go, just another quick recap. This week and moving into next week, Steve and I will both be doing a series of small videos and a few articles on what will happen, what's the likely output of a Labour government, and the impact that's going to have on small businesses. And we're going to have a really good look at some of this stuff, because some of this stuff, if it happens, may not happen. They may not win, and even if they do win, they may not bring this in because the country may not have the stomach for it. But some of these laws they're talking about bringing in, some of these changes in their manifesto into how Britain works, have some serious implications for you if you're running a small business. Can't stress that enough. And you need to be aware of what those are. Okay, you might not be able to do anything about them, but if you don't know what they are, then you can't prepare. If you can't prepare, you can't protect your business. And we can help you with that. Okay, join the Fair Job Initiative. If you're a very small business, under 150,000 turnover a year, it's $19.99 a month. That's a round of drinks. And for that, you get access to our members area, you get access to the community, you get access to specialist materials Steve and I produce and other experts in the area produce. We'll give you a library of tools and of policies you can use to help your business weather the oncoming storm. Make sure that you are meeting the various laws that have been brought in to govern you, but you're not allowing those laws to damage your business. And last but not least, we'll show you how to build a really great working environment for your people, so that it'll minimize the risk of people picking fights with you as an employer. And mark my words, with this full employment rights from day one, together with the changes to the Equality Act that make some employees more equal than others, you're going to be in a situation where I think we can see the weaponization of the employment tribunal system against employers, which I don't think has been thought through by this Labour Party. Okay, anything else to add today, Steve?
No, not today.
Smashing. Great to see you. And I better go and get all this up onto the internet. So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him. Goodbye.
Goodbye.